All right. The question today is, can you be a sovereign in the U.S. without being a citizen? And this ties to the sovereign sovereignty movement. I don't know if that's what it's called anymore. It had similar names to that. And it has to do with whether a person has to pay income taxes, and also what constitutes a permanent domicile residence in the U.S. versus a primary residence. And this issue is it has to do with a lot of legalese, and some might regard it just semantics. But my dad was a civil attorney, and so I grew up with the understanding that words are important, and the logic, and also the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and all that kind of stuff. And so, for example, in Canada, the citizens technically are not sovereigns because the Queen is still the sovereign, or the royalty, or whatever. And so one of the goals of the U.S. Revolution was to put the sovereignty in the citizens. But of course, at that time, that meant being a white male who owns land. And without going into all the other implications of that, just taking a look at what that means. If you own land, basically the land was stolen through a genocidal invasion, with the native population mainly wiped out through disease, but also war, military control, and concentration camps and death marches and that massacres and all of that. And so then the land was given out for free to the white males, on the condition that they have to improve the land to make the land quote unquote productive, and improve it within, I think it was 5 years. And by improving it, that meant they had to build a residence, a dwelling, and then also to start farming the land or extracting some kind of commodity. And at any rate, so if somebody owns land but they choose not to improve the land because they consider that nature as ecology is much more efficient and that no technology could improve upon nature, then the ownership of the land becomes very limited. So, for example, if there's land that you own it and legally you can camp there for over 6 months a year, then based on the IRS, the taxes, then that can be your primary residence if you live there for over 6 months. But just because it's your primary residence does not mean it's your permanent residence. And for something to be a permanent residence means it's your domicile. And to be a domicile, it has to be developed according to international building code standards as Western progress and efficiency as improvement. And so this means, for example, you have to get a sewage permit based on the assumption that you'll have discharge of sewage. And then you have to have if once you get that passed, then you have to have a well drilled professionally or else hooked up, to a utility system. And then the same thing for electricity and all that, and a road, and so this requires heavy machinery, and it essentially assures the destruction of the nature and ecology of the land. So therefore, you cannot be a permanent resident as a domicile. And if you can't be a permanent resident as a domicile, then you cannot file taxes. Because to file taxes, you have to have a permanent residence. So for example, you could have a campsite as your primary residence. But in order for it to be your permanent residence, the campsite would have to have all the utility modern facilities for year-round permanent dwelling. So that means, the same thing with the sewage and electricity and plumbing and all that. So then, of course, it's not really a campsite anymore. And so again, this gets into various issues. So, for example, if you own land and you can camp there legally for over 6 months, then again, it can be your primary residence. And as a primary residence, that means you could get mail there, have mail delivered there, and you could have a street address. And if you have a street address, that means you could use the street address to get a driver's license. And if you have a driver's license and the street address, you can get a job and earn money. And, if you earn money, then you would have to file taxes. But as soon as it's claimed that you're living there year-round permanently, then you are required by law to have all of the improvements and efficiency of a domicile based on the international Western building codes, which again destroys nature. So then, let's say you want to camp out, and you can camp out for over 6 months. So again, it's your primary residence. But since you're just camping seasonally, then the tax assessment would state that it's a recreational tax assessment, and it's no longer a primary residence. Because if you're just camping there, then that means it de facto it has to be recreational, because you have not improved your land. If you haven't improved it and you're camping there, then it has to be considered seasonal. And if it's seasonal, it's recreational. And therefore, the seasonal, recreational, or seasonal camping is inherently recreational. And so then even if it's your primary residence, it cannot be used as a domicile or permanent residence for filing taxes. So you're in a catch-22 already, where essentially if you are earning a wage, that makes you a itinerant migratory resident. And so now you're a legal resident, but you're no longer a citizen. And so this brings us back to the question, is if you own your own land, then you can be a sovereign of the U.S., but you're not a citizen. And this is what the sovereign movement argued. And it's mainly like a Christian movement, because they're saying that if they're sovereign, then their sovereignty is only based on their religious views, and it's not based on a government. Their sovereignty is any kind of citizenship is just a contractual statute law, whereas the Constitution is based on a self-evident sovereignty that's a philosophical definition, and the self-evident sovereignty is actually a religious viewpoint. And it goes back to the common law also in England, the Anglo-Saxon common law. And so then such a person would make the argument that they do not need to pay taxes, because they're not technically a citizen. They're just a sovereign. And of course the government's not going to agree with this. And in fact, I had a high school friend whose dad had a very successful computer parts business, and then he went on the lam, and I think he might have even been on the FBI most wanted list or something. And then because I knew this guy, his son sat in front of me in biology class in middle school, and one time well, let's tell the story, but anyway, so it was part of the Christian sovereignty movement. His dad, I didn't know this at the time, obviously, but and then the son took over his company while the dad's in prison. I don't know if he's still in prison or not, but he got a long prison sentence, like 10 years or more or something, just because he refused to pay taxes, and he owed a lot of taxes. And they lived in a rich suburb and everything. And anyway, so it's all pretty fascinating stuff. Of course, if you don't develop your land, then you are not protected from trespassing unless if you live in a tent, then technically you have protection from trespassing from the Fourth Amendment. So you cannot have the cops, the military, you don't have to house the military against your will, which is essentially what the cops are now. But the cops are essentially the same thing as the military. But if they do a safety check, that there's this safety check or welfare check exemption where they claim the cops are concerned, like anybody can make an anonymous accusation that your safety is in harm, and then all of a sudden the Bill of Rights are no longer valid, and the cops have an exemption where they can bust into your dwelling, and then if they are scared, then they can, if they claim they got scared for whatever reason, then they can assassinate you. And another thing is that you can't live in a dwelling unless you have a permit for it. Even if it doesn't matter what size it is, it does not matter. You can use a dwelling occasionally on an irregular basis. So one way around this is you could have a temporary structure that you take down before 6 months, after 6 months, because after that then you need a permit. You could camp for 6 months, and then you could camp on other land. You can only camp for a certain amount of time before you need a sewage permit. But if you don't have any discharge, then you can compost. And I called the pollution control about this, and you can, if you're composting and you don't have any discharge, then it's not sewage, so you don't need a permit. And so it's like a lot of legalese kind of regulation stuff of what you're allowed to do if you own land. And it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if you can live on your land, if you can camp there, and it can be your primary residence after 6 months of camping, which is allowed. But the question is whether a society would allow this, because you're not developing your land, and if you refuse to develop in terms of progress and efficiency, then there can be all sorts of accusations about you because you're going against basic assumptions of why you were allowed to own land in the first place.